Welcome back to Whyloric, the podcast for curious minds. I'm your host, and every episode we explore something worth thinking about. Career, life, culture, history, or just the little whys we never stop asking. So today's topic is huge. Literally, we're talking about the pyramids of Egypt. Why build something that massive, and how did they even pull it off? Let's jump in.
You look at a skyscraper today, and its purpose is it's instantly legible to our modern brains.
Right. It makes total sense to us.
Yeah, it's a vertical filing cabinet for thousands of office workers.
Yeah.
It's designed to maximize a tiny, incredibly expensive square of city real estate.
Exactly. Or, you look at a suspension bridge.
Right. You see a bridge,
right,
and you understand immediately that it exists to get cars from point A to point B over a body of water.
He has a clear job.
Exactly. We expect massive architectural achievements to have a clear, immediate, practical return on investment. The utility is visible.
Yeah.
It solves an earthly problem.
But that paradigm, that whole idea of practical utility, it just completely shatters the moment you step into antiquity.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at ancient Egypt. You are confronted with a built environment that feels entirely alien to modern sensibilities.
Totally alien.
Because the problems they were trying to solve with their architecture, well, they weren't earthly at all.
Which brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today for you, the listener. We are looking at a civilization that stood before an empty, vast expanse of desert and collectively decided to build a mountain of perfect geometry.
It's just wild to think about.
It really is. Today we're doing a deep dive into a phenomenal script from a show called Whyloric.
Yeah, specifically an episode titled, Why Did Ancient Egypt Build Pyramids?
Right. And the mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle those Hollywood narratives we've all grown up with.
Oh, absolutely. We have to get rid of those.
We're moving past the superficial assumptions.
Yeah.
And we are permanently sidelining those incredibly lazy alien theories.
Yes, the alien theory.
They always pop up when people simply cannot fathom ancient human ingenuity,
Right, because it's easier to say aliens did it than to do the math on human labor.
Exactly. So we're going to uncover the deeply human motivations, the astonishing architectural evolution, and the staggering labor logistics that actually pulled this off.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the reality is way cooler than the myths.
It really is. And the Whyloric script is a fantastic source for this because it doesn't just, look at the stones.
Right.
It looks at the psychology of the people moving them. When you strip away the pop culture myths and examine the sheer scale of the organization, it forces a complete reevaluation of what a society is capable of.
Especially when they are entirely unified by a single, all-consuming belief.
Exactly.
So before we can even touch the engineering, like how they actually moved millions of tons of rock without combustion engines or steel, we have to answer the foundational question.
The big why.
Right. Why invest so much human capital into a giant stone triangle in the middle of nowhere?
Well, to understand the why, you have to completely reorient your understanding of mortality.
Okay, how so?
The source material makes this the absolute central premise. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't a hard stop.
Right.
It wasn't an ending or a final curtain call. It was viewed merely as a transfer point, like a transition to a new eternal phase of life.
So death is just a cosmic layover.
What's fascinating here is that because it's just a layover, you have to pack for the final destination.
You have to bring your luggage.
Exactly. The pyramids were not just tombstones, which is how we often casually categorize them today.
We just think of them as big grave markers.
Right. But they were highly active, functional infrastructure. They were designed as launch pads for the pharaoh.
Launch pads, wow.
Yeah. If a society genuinely believes that death is just a doorway to a continuation of life, a life that lasts for eternity, mind you, that belief fundamentally rewires their entire economic and cultural framework.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the logistics of packing for an eternal one-way flight, though.
It's a lot of baggage.
Yeah. We aren't talking about a spiritual, ethereal journey where the soul just floats away into the ether.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Based on what they put in these pyramids, they were packing physical infrastructure. They brought wealth, furniture, and staggering amounts of preserved food.
Because the afterlife was conceptualized as a very tangible physical place.
Okay.
You would still need to eat. You would still need your wealth to maintain your status. You'd need the physical trappings of your earthly existence to ensure your comfort in eternity.
So it wasn't just a spiritual thing.
Right. The script highlights that the pyramid was essentially a dual-purpose structure. It housed the physical body of the pharaoh, and it acted as a massive, impenetrable storage facility.
For everything he would need forever.
Everything.
But hold on, that feels like a massive contradiction to modern ears.
How do you mean?
Well, if this is a spiritual transfer of the soul to a heavenly realm, why ground that journey in millions of tons of heavy stone?
Ah, I see what you're saying.
Like, why does a spiritual journey require physical rotting food or actual physical golden chairs?
Well, it highlights the friction between our modern separation of the spiritual and the physical and the ancient Egyptian integration of the two.
Okay, so they didn't separate them like we do.
Exactly. To them, the physical body and the physical objects weren't entirely separate from the spiritual essence. They were anchors.
Anchors.
Yeah, the physical body, which they went to, agonizing lengths to preserve through mummification, was the literal anchor for the soul. Without the body intact, the soul had no home base.
Oh, wow. So if the physical anchor is destroyed, the spiritual journey is basically canceled.
Completely. The entire eternal existence is in jeopardy.
That is terrifying.
Right. So the stone of the pyramid isn't just a marker to say, like, a king is buried here. Its sheer mass is a defense mechanism.
It's an armored vault.
Yes, it's meant to protect that physical anchor against the ravages of time, against grave robbers, and against the elements.
And the food.
The physical food they left behind was meant to nourish the spiritual equivalent of the pharaoh. The physical reality and the spiritual reality were just deeply intertwined.
Okay, but let's follow the thread of what that actually means for the living population, though.
It's a huge burden.
Yeah. We are talking about locking away a staggering portion of a society's wealth. If the pharaoh dies, takes his gold, his finest craftsmanship, massive amounts of agricultural output, and seals it all inside a man-made mountain, that wealth is gone.
It is out of circulation.
It is permanently removed from the economy of the living. From a purely economic standpoint, it sounds like a massive sinkhole.
I mean, it is a total economic sinkhole if you analyze it through a modern capitalist lens. You are taking the finest materials, the most skilled labor, the literal caloric output of your farmers, and you are burying it where no one can ever use it again.
It sounds insane.
But you have to view it through their macroeconomic lens. They did not view this as throwing wealth away.
What did they view it as?
They viewed it as a vital investment in the cosmic order, something they called ma'at.
Investing in the cosmic order, meaning what exactly?
Well, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was an intermediary between the gods and the people. He was literally a divine figure.
A god on earth.
Exactly. So ensuring his successful transition to the afterlife, outfitting his launch pad perfectly, was believed to be intrinsically linked to the continued prosperity of the entire nation.
Oh, I see.
If the pharaoh successfully takes his place among the gods, the sun will continue to rise.
The Nile will continue to flood.
The harvests will be bountiful. Everything depends on him making that journey.
So burying this immense wealth isn't a waste at all. It's an insurance policy.
A very expensive one.
Yeah. The living giver is paying a massive recurring premium in gold, stone, and labor to ensure the universe literally keeps functioning.
The entire economy was oriented around this eternal horizon.
Yeah.
We'll talk today about 5-year or 10-year economic plans.
Right, quarterly earnings.
Yeah, but the ancient Egyptians were executing economic planning on a timeline of literal forever.
Wow. You aren't just building for your children. You are building for your king's eternity, with the belief that his eternity is what keeps your children safe from chaos.
That's exactly it.
But speaking of what they packed for this journey, the source text brings up a detail that, well, it just stops you dead in your tracks.
It's definitely the darkest part of the script.
Yeah. We talked about food and treasure, but in the earliest periods of Egyptian history, they packed human beings.
Retainer sacrifice. It is a really macabre reality of the early dynastic periods.
The source notes that actual servants were killed and buried to accompany the pharaoh.
Yeah, and the logic of it, as brutal as it is to our modern sensibilities, it follows the exact same line as packing the food and the gold.
Which makes sense in a twisted way.
Right. If the pharaoh needs to eat in the afterlife, the food doesn't cook itself. He needs a chef.
He needs his staff.
If he needs to be entertained, he needs musicians. If he needs to manage his eternal estate, he needs administrators.
So they just killed him.
In those early days, the most direct, literal way to ensure the pharaoh had his staff in the next world was to end their lives in this one so their souls could travel with his.
It's an incredibly blunt application of their theology. The script uses the phrase murdery, which honestly feels like an understatement when you realize we're talking about systematically eliminating a significant portion of the royal household.
It's devastating to the household.
But the text also notes a fascinating evolution, right? This practice of burying actual servants didn't last.
Thankfully.
Yeah. Eventually, they shifted to using something called shabti.
The introduction of the shabti is one of the most profound sociological and theological shifts in ancient history.
Tell me more about that.
A shabti is a small, carved figurine, often made of wood, stone, or faience, shaped like a mummy. You are moving from literal flesh and blood human sacrifice to symbolic representation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these figurines were imbued with magical properties, essentially programmed to perform labor in the afterlife.
Wait, how does that actually work mechanically? Like, do they just put a doll in the tomb and hope the gods accept it?
No, it was highly codified. They would write a specific spell on the shabti, often from chapter 6 of the Book of the Dead.
Like a magical contract.
Exactly. The spell essentially commands the figurine to act as a proxy. So when the gods call upon the deceased pharaoh to do any manual labor in the afterlife, like tilling the fields, moving sand, ferrying water, the shabti is magically compelled to spring to life, raise its hand, and say, "Here I am, I will do it."
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you're listening to this, you're probably wondering exactly what I'm wondering.
Which is?
How incredibly convenient that the gods suddenly decided a small wooden doll was just as good as a living, breathing master chef.
Right.
Was this shift driven by a sudden moral awakening? Like, did a pharaoh suddenly declare that killing the palace staff was unethical? Or was this just an economic realization that they were bleeding their own country dry?
It is almost certainly driven by practical and economic realities, though theological evolution definitely plays a part.
Break that down for me.
Think about the mechanics of continuity in government. If every single time a pharaoh dies, you systematically execute the administrative and domestic elite, your best scribes, your most skilled artisans, your trusted advisors, your civilization is going to suffer massive self-inflicted brain drain every single generation.
Oh man. The new pharaoh takes the throne, and there is literally no one left who knows how to run the treasury or organize a harvest.
Because they are all buried in the desert with his predecessor.
That is no way to run an empire.
It is entirely unsustainable for a growing, complex state. Retainer sacrifice might work for a small chiefdom, but not for a sprawling, bureaucratic nation.
It's just bad economics.
Exactly. However, we shouldn't entirely discount the theological evolution. As societies mature, their understanding of the divine often becomes more abstracted.
The symbol becomes as powerful as the literal act.
Precisely.
It represents a massive loophole in ancient theology, though. I love it.
They figured out how to manipulate their own magical rules.
They did. They realized they could fulfill a rigid divine requirement. The pharaoh must have servants by tricking the afterlife with a proxy.
A magical stand-in.
It saves human lives, preserves institutional knowledge in the real world, and still checks the necessary boxes for eternity.
By relying on symbolism over literalism, the society stopped burying its human capital and started investing it into building the civilization.
And that human capital had to go somewhere.
Right.
If you're no longer slaughtering your best architects and artisans, you can actually put them to work on the ultimate architectural problem: how to house this eternal soul safely.
And that brings us to the physical design of the pyramids themselves.
Yeah, because if the goal was simply to securely store a mummified body, massive amounts of treasure, and a few hundred magical proxy statues, why build a giant triangle?
It seems overly complicated, right?
Totally. Why not just build a massive reinforced underground bunker? Why go through the agonizing geometric nightmare of a pyramid?
Because form had to follow theological function. The Whyloric script points out that the pyramid shape wasn't an arbitrary aesthetic choice. It carried profound religious meaning.
What was the meaning?
The shape itself is widely believed to represent the descending rays of the sun.
A physical manifestation of sunlight.
Yes. In Egyptian theology, particularly as the sun god Ra became more prominent, the pharaoh's soul needed to ascend to the heavens to join the gods in the solar bark.
So the pyramid was a tool for that.
The pyramid served as a literal ramp or a stairway for the soul to climb. You are looking at a petrified sunbeam.
A petrified sunbeam. That is a gorgeous image. But the moment you think about actually building it, it sounds like an engineering nightmare.
Oh, it was.
The script mentions that they didn't just wake up one day and build the smooth-sided perfection of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
No, not at all. It evolved.
It started with the step pyramid of Djezera.
The step pyramid is the crucial missing link that makes Egyptian architecture make sense.
How?
Well, before Djoser, pharaohs were buried under flat, rectangular, mud brick structures called mastabas.
Just flat tombs.
Right. But the architect of the step pyramid, Imhotep, he essentially came up with the idea to stack several of these mastabas on top of each other.
Oh, I see.
Each one slightly smaller than the one below it. He created a literal, physical staircase to the sky.
But the jump from a stepped staircase to a perfectly smooth sunbeam is massive. The source explicitly says that the smooth-sided pyramids came after builders spent generations figuring out the engineering.
It took a lot of trial and error.
Think about the pressure on these ancient architects. What happens when your civilization's spiritual mandate? We need a perfectly smooth ramp for the king's soul outpaces your actual earthly engineering capabilities.
The tension there is immense, and they didn't always get it right.
There were failures.
Oh yeah. While our source focuses on the successful evolution, the archaeological record is full of trial and error. I mean, look at the bent pyramid. Because if a structure fails, if a pyramid's angle is too steep and it begins to collapse during construction, you aren't just dealing with a failed public works project.
You're dealing with a spiritual disaster.
Exactly. You are potentially jeopardizing the eternal life of the living God King and, by extension, the cosmic balance of your entire world.
It's not like a modern bridge collapsing where you just, fire the contractor and build a new one. If the pyramid fails, the sun might not rise. The stakes are existentially terrifying.
They were fighting gravity with stone, armed only with geometry and observation.
That is wild.
The transition from the step design to the true, smooth-sided pyramid required them to master the precise mathematical calculation of angles and the internal distribution of weight.
Because if you just pile them up.
If you just pile blocks of stone into a smooth triangle, the outward pressure will cause it to blow out at the base.
It'll just crumble.
Right. They had to figure out how to angle the internal masonry to push the weight inward.
And the foundation. If you were building something that is going to weigh millions of tons, and your foundation is off by even a fraction of a degree, the apex, hundreds of feet in the air, won't meet in the center.
The whole thing twists.
Exactly. How do you perfectly level a massive expanse of desert bedrock without lasers or modern surveying equipment?
The mechanics of it are brilliantly simple but incredibly labor-intensive.
Okay, lay it on me.
One leading theory is that they trenched the bedrock around the perimeter of the base, creating a network of shallow channels.
Like a grid.
Yeah. Then they flooded those trenches with water.
Oh. Because water always finds a perfect level.
Exactly. It's a giant spirit level. Once the water settled, they would mark the water line along the sides of the trenches. Then they drain the water and they carve the bedrock down to perfectly match those marks.
That is genius.
You suddenly have a perfectly level foundation spanning 13 acres, achieved with nothing but water and sheer human effort.
That is deeply satisfying to learn. The ingenuity of using basic physics to solve monumental problems.
It really is.
But achieving that smooth-sided perfection brings us to the elephant in the room. The human effort required to actually move the stone.
Yes.
Because you don't build a 400-foot petrified sunbeam by yourself. This leads directly into what the source tackles head-on, completely debunking the most pervasive myth about the pyramids.
The myth of slave labor.
The Hollywood narrative. We all have the exact same image in our heads. The blazing sun, the crack of the whip, thousands of enslaved people dragging impossible stones until they drop dead in the sand.
It's dramatic, but it's completely wrong.
The script explicitly reveals that the archaeological evidence tells a completely different story.
It completely upends the traditional narrative. Excavations of worker villages right near the Giza Plateau have shown that the pyramids were not built by slaves.
Who were they built by?
They were built by paid laborers, highly skilled artisans, and crucially, a massive workforce of farmers.
Farmers. This is where the script unearths something truly profound about how this society functioned. The source notes that this massive labor force was mobilized primarily during the Nile flooding season.
The inundation, known as the Akhet.
Right.
Every year, the Nile would flood its banks, depositing nutrient-rich silt over the agricultural lands. It was the lifeblood of Egypt, but it also meant that for several months, the fields were completely underwater.
So if the fields are underwater, you have hundreds of thousands of farmers who suddenly can't farm.
They have nothing to do.
Let's look at the macroeconomic reality of that. In almost any other ancient society, having tens of thousands of able-bodied, bored, hungry men sitting idle for months on end is a recipe for societal collapse, rebellion, or at least massive instability.
It's a recurring seasonal crisis. The primary workforce is completely idled. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Egyptian state recognized an incredible opportunity here.
What did they do?
They took this seasonal crisis and turned it into the greatest public works project in human history.
It's like a massive ancient conscription system, but harnessed for construction rather than warfare.
Precisely.
You have an army of farmers who, for a few months a year, become the world's most effective stone movers. But the logistics of this are what I really want to dig into.
The logistics are mind-blowing.
The script says they were surprisingly well fed and that they managed this with just vibes and rope. I have a hard time accepting that.
It's a bit of an understatement in the script.
Even if they were paid, organizing tens of thousands of people in a desert environment requires a level of administration that seems almost impossible for the ancient world. How do you feed them? How do you house them without chaos?
The how of the logistics is arguably more impressive than the engineering of the stones.
Really?
I mean, think about it. The supply chain required to support a workforce of roughly 20,000 to 30,000 people in a centralized location is staggering. You aren't just moving limestone, you are moving mountains of grain, vast herds of cattle, sheep, and goats for meat, and millions of gallons of beer.
Beer.
Oh yeah, beer was a foundational staple of the ancient Egyptian diet.
They were drinking beer while building the pyramids.
It wasn't like modern beer. It was thick, nutritious, calorie-dense, and crucially, the brewing process made it a far safer source of hydration than water drawn directly from the Nile, which, could be rife with bacteria.
Oh, because boiling it purifies it.
Exactly. The workers were essentially paid in daily rations of bread and beer.
Imagine the bureaucracy required to pull that off. We struggle today to organize a large music festival with computers, internet, and modern trucking.
Like Fire Festival.
Exactly. Fire Festival was a disaster, and they had modern tech. The Egyptians were tracking, housing, feeding, and managing tens of thousands of people using only scribes and papyrus.
And they did it successfully for decades.
You have to know exactly how much grain is sitting in a granary 300 miles south. You have to calculate how many cattle need to be driven to the plateau and exactly when to slaughter them so the meat doesn't spoil in the desert heat before it can be distributed.
They had massive centralized bakeries and breweries within these worker villages.
Did they find them?
Yeah, archaeologists have found the remains of these facilities with enormous clay vats for baking bread on an industrial scale. The administration required to ensure that every single worker got their specific ration every single day required a massive, highly organized bureaucracy.
It's a logistical ballet. And when you think about it, the necessity of solving that logistical nightmare is what built their civilization.
What do you mean?
In order to pull this off, the state had to invent standardized taxation across the entire country to gather the grain.
Right.
They had to invent labor conscription tracking. They had to invent centralized resource distribution. The pyramid forced the government to become hyper-organized.
You've hit on a major historical consensus there.
Really?
Yes. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb that the state built. The process of building the pyramid is what actually built the Egyptian state.
Wow.
It solidified the power, the reach, and the administrative capacity of the pharaoh's government over a massive geographic area.
It brought everyone together.
It did. You take a scattered population of farmers from villages up and down the Nile. You bring them together to the capital. You feed them incredibly well, probably giving them access to meat they rarely ate at home.
You give them a unified divine purpose, and then you send them back home when the waters recede.
Exactly. You are actively forging a national identity every single flood season.
Because when those farmers returned to their local villages, they didn't just bring back their wages in grain or cloth.
They brought back stories.
Right, they brought back the shared experience of participating in a monumental, seemingly impossible structure for their god king.
It unified the culture vertically and horizontally in a way that is just hard to overstate.
And the direct result of that highly organized, well-fed, deeply unified seasonal workforce wasn't just a cultural symbol. It was a physical structure that literally broke human records and kept them broken for millennia.
The longevity is truly insane.
Which brings us to the final, staggering reality of what they achieved, the 3,800-year high score.
The statistics the Whyloric script closes with are the ultimate testament to the civilization's capability.
Give us the numbers.
These structures represent a massive synthesis of labor, resources, mathematics, and astronomy. And the result. The Great Pyramid of Giza held the record for the tallest man-made structure on Earth for almost 3,800 years.
3,800 years.
Yeah.
The script points out that it wasn't beaten until the 1300s. We throw the word ancient around so casually, but we need to conceptualize the sheer weight of that time span.
It's hard for the human brain to process.
To put 3,800 years in perspective for you, the listener, if you built the tallest building in the world today, in our era, it would have to remain the tallest building on Earth until the year 5800.
It forces a massive perspective shift.
It really does.
I mean, the Great Pyramid was already impossibly ancient to the ancient Romans.
That's a crazy thought.
Cleopatra lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid.
Think about what happened while that building just sat there. Empires rose, dominated the known world, crumbled into dust, and were entirely forgotten by history.
Entire religions were born.
Religions spread across the globe, fractured and evolved. Iron weapons replaced bronze. Continents were discovered by people who had no idea they existed.
And through all of it.
And through every war, every plague, every renaissance, the Great Pyramid just sat in the desert, looking down on literally all of recorded human history, completely undefeated. Nobody built anything taller until the spire of Lincoln Cathedral in England in the 14th century.
And you cannot hold a record for that long solely through brute force or by just piling rocks indiscriminately.
Right.
The script specifically mentions the integration of mathematics and astronomy, and that is the secret sauce of their permanence. It is an incredibly precise, mathematically aligned structure.
How does astronomy keep a building from falling down, though?
It's about alignment and precision on a macro scale. The Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north.
Again, without a compass. How do you find true north with that level of precision?
They likely used the stars.
Oh, of course.
One method involves tracking the path of a circumpolar star, a star that circles the pole and never sets.
Okay, I follow.
By observing where it rises on the horizon and where it sets, and then perfectly bisecting the angle between those 2 points, you find exact true north.
That is brilliant.
And by aligning the massive square base perfectly to the cardinal points, and by maintaining the exact specific angle of the casing stones as they built upward, they ensured that the staggering weight of the structure, millions of tons of limestone and granite, was distributed perfectly evenly.
So if it's not aligned perfectly, or if the angle is slightly off, the weight distribution becomes asymmetrical.
Exactly.
And over centuries, geological stress will literally tear the building apart.
Yep. It is engineered to endure geological time, not just historical time.
Wow.
The math and the astronomy were applied to guarantee the physical survival of the structure, which, as we discussed, guaranteed the spiritual survival of the pharaoh.
So what does this all mean? It is the ultimate statement of permanence in a deeply impermanent world. We talked earlier about the tension between the physical objects and the spiritual journey.
Right.
Just look at the permanence of the stone versus the impermanence of the civilization that built it. The pharaohs themselves are gone.
Their empire is gone.
The theology that drove them to build these sunbeams is a dead religion. The names of the individual scribes who tracked the grain and the farmers who hauled the stones are lost to the wind.
All of them.
But the application of their raw human effort, focused through the lens of brilliant mathematics and astronomy, literally outlasted the memory of the individuals themselves.
It speaks to a very deep human desire to leave a mark, to defy entropy.
And they succeeded.
They succeeded in ways they couldn't possibly imagined. They set out to build a launch pad for a specific king's afterlife, but they ended up building a monument to human capability that has inspired awe for 4,000 years.
It is truly staggering to process. Let's take a breath and recap this journey, because the reality of these monuments is just so much richer than the myths.
It really is.
We started by looking at an empty desert and discovering the concept of the ultimate departure gate, a civilization that viewed death as a transit point and reoriented its entire economy around packing for an eternal trip.
We examine the brutal realities of early retainer sacrifice and how practical economics and maturing theology led to the brilliant shift towards symbolic magic with the Shabtai statues.
A magical loophole that preserved human capital for the living world.
Exactly.
We track the agonizing architectural evolution from a flat mastaba to a stepped staircase, up to the mathematically terrifying, perfectly smooth sunbeams of Giza, we discovered the ingenious use of water trenches to level the Earth.
Which is still my favorite detail.
Same. And we completely debunked the great Hollywood lie, replacing the myth of a tortured slave army with the reality of a highly organized, well-fed, seasonal workforce of farmers mobilized during the Nile flood.
And finally, we marveled at the legacy of that unified effort. A monumental feat of state building, engineering, and astronomy that set a high score for human achievement that wouldn't be surpassed for nearly 4,000 years.
They aren't just massive piles of stone. They are the physical manifestation of a civilization operating at the absolute peak of its unified potential.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the end of our exploration today. But before we let you go, the Whyloric script sparked a final, provocative thought that we want to leave you with to mull over.
Think back to the sheer logistical genius of that seasonal workforce we talked about.
Yeah, Kit.
Right. The ancient Egyptian state harnessed a recurring societal pause, the flooding of the Nile, to unite their entire population.
They took the idle time of tens of thousands of farmers, and instead of letting it fracture into chaos, they redirected it into a monumental feat of collective labor.
Now think about our modern, relentlessly fragmented 2047 world. We rarely experience a unified societal pause where our collective attention or labor could be redirected toward a single monumental goal.
It's just nonstop noise now.
But imagine if we did. If we could somehow organize our global idle time, our fragmented attention, with even a fraction of the unity, the logistical brilliance, and the singular focus of those ancient farmers, what modern pyramid might we be capable of building?
What is the modern equivalent of the Great Pyramid, and what is stopping us from building it? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the myths you've been taught. Keep looking for the deeply human mechanics behind the history. And as always, keep digging deeper. We'll see you next time.
And that's it for today's episode of Whyloric. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if something today made you think, made you curious, or even made you smile, let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious. This has been Whyloric. See you in the next episode.